Welcome to this edition of Soul of Warren County. I'm your host, Mickey Gwynn. As some of you know, I published a book back in 2020 titled The Revolutions of Michael Carson. That book is loosely based on my senior year at Warren County Senior High School. I was part of a group that started the first ever Black Awareness Program. But the Black Awareness Program was not our initial intent. We wanted to form a Black student union, but we were denied twice. So we compromised and we staged the Black Awareness Week. Well, fast forward 47 years later, and Warren County High School now has a Black student union due to the efforts of one of their faculty members, Ms. Catherine Cassani, and she's my guest today. Welcome to Soul of Warren County, Ms. Cassani.
Thank you.
Now let me tell all the current students and former students, we already know this, we always call our teachers by their last name, no matter the age difference and things of that nature. At least that's Mickey's rule. So I may call her Mrs. K just so I don't mess up her last name, but it's just one of those traditional and honors I think our teachers have for the job that they do. I always like to start off a program with a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Tell us about your early years.
So I'm originally from Warren County. I was the class of 2007. Graduated from the high school, went to Belmont University in Nashville. As I was a student there, I changed my major several times, but I ended up with international political science. It was the first time when I got to college I was kind of exposed to like this world view. I took a class called Confronting Genocide, and it like basically changed my whole outlook and perspective, and I knew like that was where I wanted to be, is something international. So graduated from Belmont in 2010, moved to Washington, D.C., was an intern in D.C. for a while, which was a really good experience. And then after that, moved to New York on Long Island for a little bit. Worked a lot. Worked in a retail store and in a restaurant. Decided I was too young for this. I was only 22 at the time, so I decided to pursue my ESL certification. So I saved up, went to Italy, spent 6 weeks there, got my certification, came back to the United States and just started applying for jobs. Originally, I was going to go to Saudi Arabia, because that's where the big bucks were. And so I had applied, I got accepted for a position, and then they, like a couple weeks later, probably about 6 weeks later, they were like, we can't get a visa for you. It was really restricted at that time in Saudi Arabia, especially for women. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, that's okay. Applied and got accepted for a position in Thailand. And left like within 2 weeks, told my parents I'm going to Bangkok.
Wow.
Bought my ticket to Bangkok, flew to Thailand knowing no one there. Was picked up at the airport by someone who worked for the organization I was going to be working with. It worked out fine. So I worked in a rural town in Thailand for a little bit. I was there for about a year and then came back to the U.S., started applying again for a program to find a job, got accepted in South Korea, spent 3 years in Korea, about 45 minutes outside of Seoul, got to do a lot of traveling in Asia, went to China, went to Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, traveled a lot through Asia, and then I was like, all right, I'm ready to come back to the United States. I thought I could transition back into American society. Didn't happen that way. Was in America for about a month and was like, it's not time for me to be back here yet. I'm not ready. Started looking again for jobs, saw an opening at an international school in Uganda, which is in Africa, and applied for the position, got accepted, and then flew to Kampala.
Wow. And just to back up a little bit, you said ESL certification. Mm-hmm. Is that English as a second language,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think it's probably so hard for maybe young students, maybe in high school now, to think of going to college and then traveling like you have. I think it's a very unique experience. I've talked about that with military experience, when you get a chance to go experience different cultures and things of that nature. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. But it's probably hard to do at that young of an age. I mean, you go home and tell your folks, I'm going to Thailand. I mean, but you knew early on that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, so growing up, my parents were always really pushed traveling. My mom used to save up Sky Miles, and like there used to be cereal boxes that would have like 100 free miles, and my mom would buy like 70 of those boxes and like snip them and save up Sky Points so that she could buy air tickets for us. And so I think at the time when I was young, I was like, I want to be at the Civic Center playing basketball. But my parents were like, we're going to go somewhere. And I didn't appreciate it then. But as I became an adult, I realized the importance of it. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of people don't consider traveling. Whenever I was first going to Thailand, I went to Murfreesboro and I went to Books A Million at the mall. And I was like, hey, I'm looking for a travel book for Thailand. I asked one of the people who work there, and they were like, isn't that place super dangerous? Like, this was like right around the time like Taken had come out and all that stuff. And Bangkok was the #1 travel destination that year. And so I was like really taken aback by that. So I always say and tell my kids, like, if you approach travel with like the right amount of caution, I never had any issues. I never had any scary situations, but I never put myself in any position that would gain that type of attention or response. Or so I never had any issues. But
now I know you were there to teach English. How motivated were you to learn the local languages?
So languages are not my strong point. I think that I'm partially like tone deaf or something like that. I don't pick up on languages easy, but that's okay because as an ESL teacher, they really discouraged teachers from learning the local language because the students would then try to communicate with you in their language, and that was like not the goal, right? Like they wanted them to be forced to speak English. So I guess I was lucky in that situation.
Okay, we have sort of similar experiences in Korea. I was in Korea when I was in the Air Force, and at least I did, and it was pretty much common that we tried to pick up some of the common words. I mean, that you had to be able to communicate to some extent. We had Korean services in our dorms even that would come in and clean our rooms and things of that nature. You had to sort of communicate with them, even though they had done that for so many years. They spoke quite a bit of English, so it wasn't a big problem. A little bit on my side was out of sort of courtesy for their culture. I tried to learn a little bit of the local language so that I could at least communicate and show thanks and how to say thank you and things of that nature, so that they could do that. I think a lot of times you can communicate just as well with your facial expressions and things of that, as well as the language itself. But it's always an experience to be able to do that and to look back and think that you've gone to all those places already. This young life of yours, it's really, really amazing. So you go to Uganda, and I guess we could say your life really changed while you were in Uganda. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. So while I was in Uganda, I started working at a school. It was an international school, and international schools are usually like held to different standards than that of just like a local university or school. And so when it came up to have an opportunity to work at an international school, of course, like that's a pretty big deal. And so when I got to Uganda, they had asked me like, where do you want to teach? Do you want to teach primary, which is like elementary school age children, or do you want to teach like the little ones? And I was like, the little ones. And so I was teaching basically like a preschool and a kindergarten level students. And so while I was there, I will end up meeting my husband, or I do end up meeting my husband. He was a PE coach, and we really bonded over basketball. I played basketball growing up. He played basketball. He played in like one of the highest level leagues in Uganda. So I always say he played in like the NBA level of basketball in Uganda. And so we really bonded over that. I asked him one day, I was like, can I just play basketball? I just wanted to like exercise and do something, play a sport. And he was like, sure. And then we ended up really getting along, started dating, and we eventually got married in Uganda. Yeah, I guess that's.
Well, no,
Yeah.
you can go. You can keep right on going. Like I say, I always like to hear these stories of our cultures.
Yeah.
And I'll ask you, has there been any cultural issues that you've had to work through just from being from different cultures?
Yes. There's been a lot of issues that we've had to work through. So, why did we come back to the United States? Well, at the time when I was in Uganda, I was doing my master's in education. And so part of doing your master's in education is you have to do 6 months of student teaching. And I knew that I had to complete that in order to finish my degree. So we had gone back and forth about like, where did we want to be? Like, where did we want to be in the world? Did we want to be in Europe? Did we want to be in Dubai? Did we want to come back to the United States? But I knew I had to come back at least for a period of time. And so I ended up having my son. I came back to the United States to give birth. Alex actually couldn't get a visa. We tried 3 different times, was denied every time. So he didn't get to be there for the birth of our son. So that's one of the things that we had to overcome.
Right.
And so knowing that and like the potential that like, you know, he could be denied or his visa could not be renewed, we eventually got it. We decided that it was probably the best to go and get his citizenship as well, American citizenship. So we had the plan to come back to the United States. We're going to let me finish my master's degree and we're going to work on his citizenship. And so we still haven't got that citizenship, but it could be literally any day now. We could get the letter saying that we can go and like have our interview and officially fill out the forms of intentions to get the citizenship. It's a lot longer process than I think a lot of Americans like truly understand. So he came back to the United States and like the transition was a big culture shock for him. The cold weather was a huge culture shock.
Sure.
Winters, Uganda, it's sunny pretty much all year round. It was a culture shock for me too because like I'd never had to function as an adult in America, right? So like understanding like how insurance works and you know how to like the process of buying a car and like the process of buying a house, like this is all new to me as well, you know, and so it's both 2 people who don't have a lot of experience in this trying to navigate this. I'm very thankful for my parents who were helpful in like giving us advice and encouragement because it was tough. It was tough. And then after I finished my master's in education, I just felt like I needed to keep going because, again, like my passion is international politics and just international relations. MTSU has a program for international relations. I applied to that, and then I also finished my master's in that as well too. So yeah.
You know, I think from my experience, you know, fortunately being able to travel quite a bit during my military career, I think you always, at least I did, found things that I really liked about another culture. But I also found a lot of things that I like and said to myself, well, I still am glad I live in the United States and that's my home country because, you know, you do find those kind of things that you appreciate. But it seemed like I always gravitated back to, well, yeah, you know, the USA it has its issues, but it's not such a bad place either, you know.
Yeah.
So it seemed like you sort of found that same type of thing there. But yeah, I can imagine the cultural shock. That's why I was asking you about that, you know, having to do that.
Well, can I add with real fast, like when it comes to like Africa as a whole and Uganda, like it's my favorite place like I've been and lived in so far. Like the Ugandan culture, like I'm super proud of my husband and his Ugandan culture.
Right.
My kids know that Mason spent his first year of life in Uganda, but he doesn't really have recollection.
Right.
And we always talk to them about the fact that, you know, like they are African and they are from Uganda. And like we keep in touch with his family often. And it's something that like I said, I'm super proud of. Africa as a whole, to me, it was so much more welcoming. It was so much more accepting of women. I feel like in Asia, I feel like they had like certain beauty standards, and if you didn't fit those beauty standards, like people were going to tell you don't fit those beauty standards, right? And I found like when I was in Uganda, it was like we love and accept you for who you are. And so like the culture there, I really fell in love with, and my husband and I both want to make sure that like we keep it like in our future. So whether that be through like building a house there eventually, or at least like purchasing land, having something there that we can give to our kids, taking them back, letting them know their family, that's something that is super important to us.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. I worked with a lady that was from Ethiopia, and she was telling me about her culture and things. And that's somewhere I've always wanted to go, and if
Yeah.
the Lord blesses me at
Yeah.
one point in my life, I want to go to Africa.
Yes.
I've always said I wanted to do that. But she was talking about their culture, and she was also talking, almost like you are now, about trying to bridge that gap between raising her family, her son and daughter who were born in the United States, but also trying to maintain that attachment to their Ethiopian culture in her case. And she would take her kids back quite often, and they would spend months back in Ethiopia. And it was such a different, drastic change in lifestyle. I mean, their parents lived in more of a rural area, and the kids would go back, and they weren't used to drinking goat's milk and things of that nature. And she really had to work with them to try to have them accept that. But as they got older, they started to want to go back, because they appreciate that part of their culture and things. So I'm sure that probably be the same way with you. Once your kids get to the age where they can appreciate that part of their life, I'm sure they'll enjoy going back and seeing your husband's, his roots, as we say, back in the motherland. That's one reason I always wanted to go. Okay, I could talk about this all day, but I know we've got other things to talk about, and that's the Black Student Union. I sort of told you the story when I came over and met with your group a couple of weeks back, and I mentioned that in the intro about the book that I wrote. We really wanted that Black Student Union, and as I look back on that time, probably one of the main reasons we did not get a Black Student Union was because we didn't have an advocate. We didn't have a faculty member who really was there working with us, or even being the person out front to go to the administration. We did have a teacher come on later on that helped us out quite a bit to do the Black Awareness Week. He was very instrumental in that. Where did the thoughts, the ideas of doing the student union come from?
So whenever I was doing my student teaching, I did it at Riverdale, and I did two subjects. I did economics, and I did African American studies. And so I had been waiting for an opportunity to open at the high school. I was at the middle school before that. And any kid that I've taught, like, they'll tell you that, like, my heart is really with Africa, and like I will sing its praises, till the day that I die. And so when I was doing that class at Riverdale, just the experience of teaching these students, it was a majority Black student class. And it was like it felt to me like it was like one of the first times that they had someone come and be like, Africa's great. Africa's the future. Africa, the continent, it's thriving. There's modern cities, and like people are smart, and they're, like in Africa or in Uganda, like if something's broke, you fix it. Like, and so my husband is an example of this. Like, you give him a hair dryer, like, and he'll be able to fix you, that hair dryer, because
instead of going buying a new one, right?
Instead of going buying a new one. And so like you figure out how to do this stuff. And so like I think it was like the first time that they had someone being like, this is a great place and it's awesome. And it was probably the first time that they really get into like African American history, and it's not just like the sugar-coated version of it. About like, the War of Northern Aggression, and like slavery really wasn't that bad. And like the teacher that I worked with, like we really tried to make sure that we were teaching like the truth. And we used primary sources. The Library of Congress has a really good collection of like firsthand interviews of slaves, like after the Civil War, and we would use their narratives and the things that they said, and we'd talk about them and stuff like that. And so it was really empowering. And I was so lucky to get to like watch that class, like, because I would have never known about it unless I would have been able to, you know, sit through it and watch
Right.
the class. And I got to eventually end up teaching it as well too. And so when the opportunity at the high school opened for a U.S. history teacher, and I was interviewing with Chris Hobbs, I said, Chris, like, this is a class that I need to teach. Like, I need to, or we need to have it. I want African American studies to be taught here. And he was like, you're right. It needs to be taught here. Like, he was 100% on my team, on board with it from like the very beginning. And so I knew going into this year that we could not add it to the curriculum this year, but it
Right.
could be potentially added to the curriculum for next year. And so like we're keeping our fingers crossed. They haven't announced like what classes have made and what haven't, but I think I've talked to enough kids and bothered them enough that like I'll hopefully have enough that will sign up for it. And so I knew that this was potentially on the table, this course. And so I had a student who came to me who was a middle school student that I had previously. And she was mixed, and like she was like, you know, like my dad really like enjoyed that, like I had you as a teacher, and like I got to talk to him a little bit. And she was like, I just wish we had like a club or something like this. And it had already been something that was kind of like I had thought about, but I was like, it's my first year. Should I really rock the boat? Because remember, at this point, like the Black History Club,
Right.
which a lot of people in Warren County grew up with, I think it was around for like 17 years or
Right.
so. It had evolved into the Multicultural Club, and I want to say that it had been the Multicultural Club for about 7 years at this point. So the kids that are in high school, all years, like they had not been exposed to this club yet or before. And so I was like, well, maybe like we should have like a Black Student Union. Maybe we should try, and that was like the name that I initially wanted to go with. I didn't want it to be just evolved around history. Like I wanted to also include like activism and like, you know, promoting diversity. And so that's why I didn't go with like Black History Club.
Right.
And so I got to thinking about it, and I came home and I was talking to my husband. I was like, well, what do you think about this? What if we start this club? But I was like, but I don't know if I would have any kids, because I didn't know any of the kids really at this point, because
Right.
I had just barely started working. And Alex said, you know, even if you have 5 kids sign up for it, like it would still be successful. And I kind of like went with that mentality, right? Like it doesn't have to be like 100, 200 kids. You know, even if I just have like a small group, like you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so we had something called Club Rush. And Club Rush is like the opportunity for all the clubs at the high school to get together. They like all set up booths. And students can walk around and see like what club do they think they would be interested in. And so I picked a few students out and I said, hey, like, would you just hand out flyers for me? Like, and we got some like temporary tattoos that we could like put on like hands and arms and stuff. And then I had like a logo. I didn't have the logo made. I found it on the internet, but then I had it like put on a big, like, I don't know, like, what's the word for that? Screen print on, like, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, whatever happens will happen. I'm just gonna like let it go, and hopefully we'll have turnout for it. And so throughout Club Rush, I had lots of students who were coming up, and I think at the end of Club Rush, we walked away with about 65 people signed up or so. Yeah. Yeah.
Good, that's good. And as you probably know, the racial mix in Warren County has changed over the years.
Yeah.
When we were doing our thing back in 1975, the black population in Warren County was about, I guess, 15-20%, somewhere around there, and then pretty much the other percentage of that were whites. That's changed over the year. There's a very large Hispanic population in Warren County now, and that's changed the demographics, totally than when I was back in school. So we had sort of a ready-made membership back in those days, just because of the numbers that we had. And I know that's changed. And I noticed when I came over and spoke with your group, it's a very diverse group. It's not a group of just black students. It's a very diverse group. I think that's an indication of society in general, the way things have changed. You mentioned about the international aspect of Africa. Back in the 70s, there was even a Back to Africa campaign. Even back in the 30s, there was a Back to Africa campaign where people were saying, slavery's over, we have our freedom, let's go back to our motherland. It was semi-successful to a point, but there was a lot of sort of pride in the African culture and the African history. I remember having a dashiki and wearing those kind of things back in the day. But a lot of that's changed. And I think because we sort of stopped sort of teaching our roots a little bit, we became more Americanized, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but that's just happened over time. So I was very, very happy to see that the student union was there, and probably even more happier that your approach is not so much we're going to be a group that's going to be walking down the school hall with a raised fist, but I want to teach them about their roots in Africa and things that are going on in Africa. I think some of us even have very jaded ideas of what Africa is like today.
Yeah. For sure.
I had one of the professors from MTSU come in last year to do a program on Kwanzaa, and he goes back and he takes students back to different parts of Africa every year. And he was saying some of the comments he was getting about, well, where are you going to stay? He said, well, they have hotels.
Yeah.
They have big cities, like they're big modern cities and things of that nature. And a lot of us don't realize that we get so caught up in some of the Facebook posts of the safari hunts and things of that nature. And you think that's all that's in Africa, and by no means is that the case. So appreciate the approach that you're going about, not only having a union, and sometimes that has its own connotations, but teaching about African history and things of that nature, and putting all that stuff together, the international aspect of that. And if you're able to work out a trip back with some of your students, you need a chaperone, give Mickey a call.
For sure.
But good. Now, I know you have some rules with the union as far as officer membership and things of that nature. Was that to try to have that little bit of African American flavor to do those was that one of the reasons behind that?
Yeah, so when the club was established and we now had membership, the search came now for leadership. And so I had students apply. I had several students, but we were able to basically give anyone who wanted a leadership position. We were able to work it out, because we had 6 or 7 people apply, which again I was kind of shocked about. I was like, wow, so grateful though. And so whenever we got together for the first time as a group, I asked them what kind of space do we want this to be? You can't just have a club for African American students, right? Because there's laws against that.
Yeah, understand.
And so I had gone to Chris and I had kind of spoke to him about what does this look like? And so I kind of knew what he had an idea about, but he was talk to the students about it and see. And the students were the ones who were no, we don't want this to just be for African American students. We want this to be open to anyone who is willing to learn and listen and help and be advocate for us. One of the things Chris had talked about when we had our professional development day for teachers was that African American students graduate at a lower rate than that of their white classmates. And he said this is a problem. And so that was kind of one of the things that had originally put that idea of having a club in my head was that is an issue. It needs to be addressed. And we have someone, an admin, who is the principal, right, who is willing to advocate and acknowledge this is a problem, right? And so when I was talking to the kids, I told them about that. I told them about the class that we could potentially have. And I said, this is your decision. This is not my decision. And I think that even though I started the club, it's not my views that I push, right? It's the kids and what they want and what they need. And so it was across the board unanimous, that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking to be isolated from everybody else. We're looking to grow and educate. And so that was what we went with.
Yeah, and you got to have that. You just can't be so segregated that you just can't do anything done. You have to work together in anything, not
Right.
only that kind of environment, but in any environment. We talked about sort of that the history of the Black Awareness Week. It became Black History Club at the school, the Multicultural Club. What are your plans on sustainability? How are we going to keep this Black Student Union going from year to year?
Well, this year I feel like our goal has been to mainly just like get the name out there and start like kind of marketing to these students. One of the first things I did whenever we like kind of had ourselves established was I went directly to the community. I went to Young Men United,
Right.
messaged them on Facebook, said, "Hey, we want a meeting with you." And they're like, "Well, who are you?" I was like, "We're making a Black Student Union, right? And we need your help." And so I also reached out to Wayne Wolford. We've talked with the board of the Black History Museum quite a bit. And so like I knew from the beginning, like this is not something that I could do alone. Like this has to be a community effort.
Right.
And I always say to the kids like that are in the club, like we don't want just you, like we want your family. Like, and that's kind of what makes us a little bit different from other clubs. And so Young Men United met with us, and they've been a huge supporter for us. They have offered like mentorships, same for the board members who are on the Black History Museum. Like they want to take the students under their wing and they like really want to help them. It's been a strange dynamic because you have to keep in mind that like the kids that are seniors now, like COVID happened their freshman year, right? So they went home on spring break and never came back. So these kids that are now seniors have never had like a real authentic high school experience, right? And so there is like this element of like kind of retraining these kids to understand like, okay, you have meetings and you have to sign up for like volunteer opportunities,
Right.
and you have to sign up and bring your paperwork in for field trips. So this year I feel like it's just it's kind of like our training year,
Sort of
right?
filling things
Yeah,
out.
trying to feel things out a bit. But where do I see it in the future? Personally, I would really like for other counties, other high schools to establish their own Black Student Union so that we could do stuff with like other counties and we could maybe have like a regional conference or something like that. I had looked up resources for Black Student Unions whenever I was trying to like initially create it. And there's really not a lot out there when it comes to high schools. There's more stuff for college. And so I kept thinking like, I thought that the Black History Club used to go to something every year, but after talking to Wayne Wolford, it sounds like they kind of created their own like 2 or 3 day field trip to go
Right.
see some of the civil rights monuments and stuff like that in Memphis, and then later I think they would go to Montgomery. But I was thinking like it would just be so great if there was something that like these unions could come together and like celebrate together, because most clubs like Beta Convention, I know Beta and maybe FCCLA, like they have things that they go to like on a national level.
Right, right.
And so I'd really like I'm going to speak that into existence so that maybe something like that could happen. But I think mentorships is a big deal. And then like if we could create some kind of like partnership with other clubs from other high schools, then.
Well, I think there's a number of resources. You mentioned Young Men United. We have the the Black History Museum that very fortunate to be elected this past weekend, as a matter of fact, as the director of the museum.
Congratulations.
So, we definitely want to partner. I talked about that when I came and spoke to the students. I also have some sort of inroads with the Africana Studies program at MTSU that, as I mentioned, the gentleman that came and did the presentation on Kwanzaa, he works in the Africana Studies program at MTSU. So if there's anything that we can do from the museum standpoint, anything that we can do from the history of where we started with the Black Awareness Week back in 1975 to mentor students and things of that nature, by all means don't hesitate to ask. We're more willing to do that because we know you have to keep it going. If it not, it goes away. So we're willing to do whatever we can to try to help you.
Thank you.
maintain
Thank you.
the sustainability of the Black Student Union. As I told your class, I was so envious when I heard about that. I'm like, man, that's what we wanted to do. We couldn't do it. So just very proud of you, very proud of you, and thank you so much for doing that for our kids. And like I said, just let us know how we can help you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for coming on today. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much.
We have to come and go talk some more about your travels on
Yes.
another episode. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that. All right. And thank you for joining us today. Please join us for the next edition of Soul of Warren County. Until then, make today and every day a great day.